My wife disappeared after a girls' trip, and now she's trying to manipulate her way back into my life, acting like nothing ever happened. Have you ever wondered what would make a woman leave without a word? Someone you thought you knew, someone you shared everything with. Yet after just one trip, she vanishes. What would you do if you realized everything you thought you knew was shattered by an unimaginable shock? This story will keep you glued to the screen. Is this just a coincidence? Or was it a carefully planned move? To uncover the truth, you have to step into this story and explore for yourself. Are you ready? Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. I was married to my wife for the entire 4 years that we were together. To be honest, I thought we were doing well. For the most part, I believed that we were in agreement and we had plans and a life plan laid out. The problem is that we both desired children, or I believe that we both did. As soon as we were married, we began to discuss it seriously. She would constantly express her desire for 2 or 3 children, rambling on about the names we would give them, the nursery decor, and everything else. She would even spend time on the internet planning our future children's lives while perusing baby gear and clothing. It kept us connected and was sort of our thing to talk about. We were eager to begin this new chapter in our lives together, and everything appeared to be going according to plan. But after that, we received some terrible news, which really devastated me. We visited a doctor to find out what was wrong after a few months of trying to conceive. To cut a long tale short, it was me. The doctor essentially informed us that our chances of naturally becoming parents were very limited because my count was much too low. It felt like a stomach punch. I felt worthless. Our entire set of plans vanished in a flash. I was hit hard, terribly hard by the news. I ended up for a while in a fairly awful position. I was a complete disaster at first, but therapy ultimately helped. At first, she seemed to be rather supportive, stating that it didn't matter and that she would be content with us alone. However, there was something strange about the way she said it right from the start. She seems to have dropped it far too soon. She was all about starting a family one minute, and then she claimed she didn't need children to be content. I understand that people change their ideas, but her entire demeanor seemed strange to me. From thinking about baby names, she had completely stopped talking about children. Furthermore, it seemed as though she began to view me in a different light. She would suddenly start making little jabs at me that she had never mentioned before, like how I wasn't taking care of myself, that I should work out, or that I should be more productive around the house. Yes, I could have gained a few pounds, but it seemed like she was constantly looking for reasons to accuse me. She would dismiss it when I questioned her about the abrupt shift in attitude. She would claim that I was being unduly sensitive and that I was only dreaming. But I was aware of a problem. She was different from the lady I married, the one who would spend hours sitting with me discussing our future. She wasn't particularly cruel, but there was a certain coldness about her, as if she had already mentally checked out and was merely doing the part. I suppose that as time went on, I began to trust her when she assured me that everything was okay. In order to avoid coming out as needy or insecure, I quit pressing. In any case, after a few years, we were only getting by. We had gotten into a pattern where we hardly discussed anything important. We seemed more like housemates than husband and wife. She would always dismiss my attempts to discuss other choices, such as adoption or surrogacy, by stating that she didn't want to consider them. I never really believed her when she said, "As long as we're together, I'm happy." She seemed more concerned with persuading herself than I was. Suddenly, she informs me she wants to take a girls' trip. Now, traveling with her buddies was nothing out of the ordinary. She had previously done it a few times, and I had always encouraged her. For a long, she talked about wanting to travel to America with her pals while we lived in Brighton. We had developed this trust over the years, so I didn't give it a second thought. I therefore made sure she had everything she needed, assisted her with packing, and drove her to the airport. I recall her final words before she departed. She turned to me and said, "Thank you for being so supportive." I found it a little strange that she would say that because I hadn't done anything particularly noteworthy, but she appeared so sincere that I dismissed it as her simply expressing gratitude. I remained up that night to make sure things went well by calling her when she landed. I kept myself occupied around the house, watching TV, keeping an eye on the time, and waited for her to text me to let me know she had landed because her flight was expected to take roughly 9 hours. I called her to check in as soon as I noticed her flight had landed. The phone kept ringing, but no one picked it up. I didn't give it much thought because I assumed she was exhausted and might have gone directly to her hotel and crashed. However, when morning arrived, I still hadn't heard from her. I began to have this nagging concern in the back of my mind. I thought perhaps she was simply busy or her phone was on quiet, so I tried calling again and then texted her a few times. However, I was officially freaking out after a couple more hours of radio silence. In the end, I gave her sister a call to check whether she had heard from her. Nothing. I was really beginning to freak out by this point. In the hopes that something had gone wrong with her phone or that she just hadn't had time to check in, I even went so far as to call her companions, who were meant to be traveling with her. However, they were also perplexed when I called them. They did not accompany her on the trip. Back at home, they were enjoying coffee while seated 2 streets away. It truly hit me at that point. She wasn't traveling with any girls. She didn't have any friends. She hadn't accompanied anyone anywhere. She simply vanished. It seemed as though my stomach had fallen through the floor as I sat there with the phone. I was unable to comprehend it. Why would she tell me such a lie? Why wouldn't she notify me before leaving? I made an effort to persuade myself that it was an error of some sort, such as perhaps she had missed a connecting flight or that she had been unable to contact due to an emergency. But I knew in my heart that she had this planned. Her expressing thank you for being so supportive and the entire girls' trip were all components of whatever she had been imagining. I was at a loss for what to do. I couldn't wake up, as if I were living in a nightmare. I had never married a woman like this. I didn't even recognize this person. The coldness, the way she had stopped discussing our future, and those small digs about my appearance and health all began to make sense. I simply hadn't noticed, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to see, that she had been drifting away for a while. I just sat there looking at my phone that night, hoping for a call, a text, anything. However, nothing materialized, and I knew in my heart that it wouldn't. I remember lying there and staring at the ceiling when I woke up the following morning, thinking that it was all just a bad dream. But when she saw that her side of the bed was empty, reality set in. In fact, she had gone. After packing her bags, she disappeared. The promises I had given myself the previous evening, maybe she was late or perhaps her phone died, were no longer valid. She had clearly planned this and wanted to go. I was completely in denial for the first few days. I would keep ringing her phone in the hopes of hearing her voice and perhaps receiving an explanation. I even left messages. I kept leaving them in the hopes that she would understand, even though I was half the time at a loss for words. However, I only received quiet, which strangely made things worse. It was as though I had been a stranger to her all along and had been left to work things out on my own without knowing what had gone wrong. Her family was initially just as surprised as I was. They hadn't heard from her, and her mother didn't know anything about her plans. In the end, I visited there more times than I could remember in order to speak with her mother and get answers. They must have felt sorry for me. When I couldn't bring myself to cook, her mom would prepare meals for me and occasionally let me stay there. She would sit there while I talked about all the tiny things that didn't make sense, attempting to figure out how my life had suddenly become so complicated. And to be honest, there were times when I was too numb to speak and just sat there in silence. I oscillated between rage, despair, and remorse. What went wrong was a question I kept asking myself. Was there a sign I missed? Was I not paying enough attention to her? On certain days, I would review all of our arguments and conversations in an attempt to determine what caused her to leave. I kept thinking about what I could have done better and how I could have preserved our marriage. It may sound dramatic, but I was completely preoccupied with figuring it out. It seemed as though the solution would somehow make everything better. I hardly slept or ate, and my work also began to suffer. People took notice. When they inquired about my well-being, I would just dismiss it by claiming that I was occupied with personal matters. Admitting the truth, the fact that my wife abandoned me without saying a word was embarrassing. I eventually told a few close friends, and they tried their best to divert my attention by bringing me out to hang out and encouraging me to move on. However, I would still ponder about her, wondering where she was and why I wasn't enough to keep her around, even when I was with them. The incessant inquiries from strangers, including neighbors, relatives, acquaintances, and even former coworkers who had heard I was married, were among the worst aspects. It was like pulling out a new scab each time somebody asked, "How's married life treating you? And how's your wife?" I would just smile and tell them that everything was good since I lacked the courage to tell them she had left. But each time I repeated that untruth, it felt more weighty. The only thing that worked in the end was therapy. Although I had never gone before, I realized I couldn't manage it alone after a few months of hardly functioning. In order to talk to someone who was impartial and unfamiliar with our baggage, I contacted a therapist and began attending once a week. It was beneficial. I would express my rage, betrayal, and the void she had left in my life. I would talk endlessly about the restless evenings and how I would lie awake repeatedly, reliving everything. The therapist assisted me in realizing that she would not have remained here if it had been a magical moment. It wasn't my fault. She made the decision to go. It was a difficult pill to take. I had the feeling that I was flawed and had somehow alienated her for a long time. However, I gradually began to see things differently. I chose to overlook her long-standing coldness and distance, assuming that things would improve on their own. I had persuaded myself that I could maintain my composure and that our marriage could be saved by my efforts alone. The realization that as time passed, I began to restore my life in tiny increments. It wasn't until she departed that I realized how much I had lost in our marriage. I had always been the one who tried his hardest to make sure she was content and that our home life was comfortable. But now that I had so much free time, I was at a loss for what to do. I therefore began resuming old pastimes that I had forgotten about. I tried cooking new meals, went to the gym, and started reading literature I had been putting off. Eventually, the work also improved. I was hardly keeping up with my job at first, simply going through the motions. However, when I began to feel more like myself, I worked harder at my job. I felt like I still had control over something in my life, which was one of the few things that gave me a sense of accomplishment. Although I had always been skilled at what I did, I now give it my all. The extra hours, the concentration. I got a promotion as a result of it, something I never would have obtained if I had been moping about my problems. Even yet, there were painful days. A picture, an old movie ticket stub, or other small items that brought back memories I tried to forget would occasionally remind me of her. Looking at them, I would question her actions, whether she ever considered me, and whether she ever felt bad about what she had done. But gradually, those times began to disappear. I was able to let go of those memories a little more quickly and move on a little more easily each time. Additionally, I got back in touch with people I hadn't seen much of since getting married. We resumed our activities, including hiking and hitting the golf range, something I hadn't done in years. Having folks by my side who weren't involved in the mess and who could support me in moving on without pulling me back into the agony was a relief. In hindsight, I saw that I had invested much too much of myself in that relationship, in being her spouse. I felt like I had lost a significant portion of who I was when she departed, as if she had taken a piece of me with her. But I was rediscovering who I was, piece by piece. Although it wasn't quick or simple, I was making progress. I was finally able to see someone who wasn't defined by her past actions when I looked in the mirror at the conclusion of that year. I wasn't just the man whose wife had abandoned him. I had rebuilt, I had survived, and I was stronger now. I felt as like I could truly live my life without her shadow looming over me for the first time in years. To be honest, I took pride in that. I believed I had moved on from everything. After all that chaos, we had at last begun to seem normal again, or as close to normal as it could be. My work was going really well, my friends kept me occupied, and I had my routine down pat. Even my daily thoughts about her had stopped. Even while I still occasionally had flashbacks to odd memories, it wasn't as frequent as it used to be, when everything I did was somehow related to her. She was therefore the last person I expected to see standing there when someone knocked on my door one Saturday morning. But there she was with a baby at my doorway. I went cold. It was like witnessing a ghost, and for a moment my brain simply stopped functioning. Though perhaps a touch worn down, she still had her typical appearance. She looked at me as if she genuinely believed that I would be pleased to see her. I thought I was past caring, so yes, that really got to me. As it happens, meeting her evoked many feelings I had previously suppressed. At first, I remained silent. I just stared as I stood there. As if nothing had happened, she gave me a smile before asking, "May I come in?" The nerve. Really, I mean it. She just shows up here as if I should be welcoming her back with open arms after everything she's done. However, I maintained my composure and told her, "No, you can stay right there," explaining that I didn't want her in my home, bringing all that commotion back into the one area I had created for myself. Despite her rather disoriented appearance, she remained in her spot and simply launched into her story. She began by saying, "I know this might be a shock, but I wanted to come back and explain everything." Her expression was hopeful, as though she truly thought I would be willing to listen. I was tempted to just close the door and laugh in her face, but I was too intrigued. I was curious about the reason behind her disappearance and what she had come up with. She continued by explaining that she had erred in leaving and that she had come to the realization that she had lost the greatest thing that had ever occurred to her. Not my words, but hers. She claimed to have thought a lot and to have finally realized what was important in life after having this child. After years of ignoring me, it seemed that what mattered most was unexpectedly knocking on my door. "This is our second chance," she remarked, glancing down at the infant. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Our second opportunity? As if this child were some sort of magical reset button that would allow us to resume where we left off. I was furious on the inside, but I attempted to maintain a neutral appearance. She continued by adding that although she had made a grave error, we could now start over, just the three of us. She wanted us to be a family once more. "Why did you leave?" was the final question that had been bothering me ever since she appeared. I tried to speak as steadily as I could, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could contain myself. Now that she was here, I needed to hear it from her since I had tortured myself with all the possibilities for years in an attempt to comprehend. After hesitating and glancing down at her feet as if embarrassed, she finally told me the truth, or at least what I thought it was. She acknowledged that she had left because she wanted a child and had found someone who could provide one for her because I couldn't. She honestly stated it as if it were insignificant, as though she hadn't destroyed my life, and as though I should just know and take it as gospel. She clarified that although the man she had left didn't stay, she had already given birth and had suddenly come to the realization that she wanted me back. Easy. I paused to think about what she was saying. She was here confessing that she had left me, fled with a man, had his child, and now expected me to accept it, as if I should simply forget and forgive. "So you left, found someone else, had his baby, and now you think you can come back and pretend like nothing happened?" I asked her. She broke down in tears and apologized, admitting that she had made a big mistake, but I remained unmoved. She kept talking about how she knew she was supposed to be with me and that I was the one she really loved. To be honest, maintaining a straight face was difficult. She sounded so crazy that I was shocked. I could see it clearly on her face that this was desperation, not love. She then attempted to guilt-trip me by talking endlessly about how difficult it had been for her to be a single mother. In fact, she attempted to paint herself as the victim in all of this, acting as though her decisions hadn't brought her to this point. She assured me she was prepared to work things out this time and that she wanted my help. "Who does she think I am?" was all I could think about. I listened to it all as I stood there, but I had had enough. I told her right away, "You made your choice a long time ago, and now you have to live with it. There's no second chance here." She appeared astonished, as if she had never even imagined that I would say no, as if she truly believed she could simply saunter back into my life because it would suit her. She became irate just when I thought she would finally understand and depart. She became angry with me, accusing me of selfishness and demanding that I give her another chance to make amends. She said that she could have taken half of everything and divorced me at that time if she had so desired. She even had the audacity to remark that the house should still belong to her. I felt a surge of relief as it seemed like her true self was revealing itself in front of me. At last, I was recognizing her true self. I refrained from arguing with her. I didn't speak louder. We're done. You wanted a different life, and now you have it. This isn't my responsibility anymore." I simply replied, looking at her, and then I closed the door in her face, interrupting her if she had any more words to say. I was struck with a peculiar sense of serenity as I stood there and heard her muffled screaming coming from the other side of the door. She might shout, cry, knock, or do anything else. However, I knew I would never allow her to return. This stranger who believed she could pick up the pieces when it was convenient for her took the place of the lady I had loved and married. Feeling lighter than I have in years, I moved away from the door and took a seat. I believed that was it. After I shut the door behind her, I assumed she would understand and simply walk away. However, no. Rather, she began pounding on the door while shouting various things. The nerve seemed unbelievable to me. She had the gall to stand there and insist that I listen to her while I was in the one place that was truly mine. The only place I had been able to recover from the disaster she had left me in. I initially considered ignoring it and letting her scream till she became weary. But then I started to wonder. I was curious to know what kinds of excuses she would offer this time. I opened the door just enough to let her know I was paying attention, but not enough to let her in. She appeared to be astonished that I hadn't given her the response she desired, as if she had just been slapped across the face. As if we were having a typical argument and not coping with her abandonment, she began a lengthy monologue in which she expressed her willingness to forgive me for closing the door on her and her want to start over. She went on and on about how if we both worked hard, we could work things out. I was unable to contain myself at that moment. I laughed, really laughed, because this woman had more nerve than I had ever seen. When I did that, she appeared enraged, as if I should feel guilty for not paying attention to her. I said to her, "You left, you had your chance, and you threw it all away. I'm not just going to pretend none of that happened because you feel like it." Her face flushed, and she began to talk about how she had been so lost after leaving, and how she had discovered her error too late. "You don't understand how hard it was for me," she said. However, I didn't believe it. I informed her that she had taken the decision to leave. She had plotted it, made up a falsehood about it, and then carried it out. Now her remorse meant nothing. That's when she lost it. Her entire tone shifted. She stopped doing the melancholy, repentant act and began to attack me, accusing me of being unjust and lacking the grace to give her another chance. "If I'd wanted to, I could have taken everything from you back then. I could have taken half of everything you own," she bravely said. I simply stood in awe. This woman who had abandoned me without saying anything now believed she should be compensated in some way for not attempting to fraud me, as if she was worthy of praise for not being as awful as she could have been. I replied, "So what am I supposed to be grateful for? Grateful that you only ditched me and didn't take my stuff with you?" Her expression was a mixture of rage and something more, possibly desperation or guilt, as she gazed at me. But to be honest, I didn't give a damn by then. I had just finished. That was where all the years I had spent questioning myself, feeling bad, and wondering if I was somehow to blame for her leaving vanished. I felt as though the burden I had been dragging about had finally been removed when I met her for who she truly was. But she wasn't finished. She began to pace my porch while complaining that I would regret not giving her another chance and that I would never find someone like her. In fact, by refusing to take her back, she attempted to make me feel as though I was the one who was missing out. It was strange. As if I should be pleading with her to stay, here she was, the one who ruined everything we own. She became even louder and continued to complain about how I had made her leave in the first place when she realized I wasn't going to back down. She said that none of this would have occurred if I had been more understanding about the entire kid situation. Her reasoning seemed to indicate that I had failed her as a husband because I couldn't conceive, which somehow excused her from leaving to have a kid with someone else. The mental acrobatics were amazing. To be honest, I was shocked that she was attempting to blame me for her decisions. I straight up told her, "Look, if you wanted a kid that badly, you could have told me the truth. You didn't have to lie to my face and pretend everything was fine while planning your exit." To that, she had nothing to say, simply looked at me as if I had hit her. However, I prevented her from speaking. I said, "You made that choice all on your own, and now you've got to live with it. That's not my problem." She made one final attempt, returning to her dejected expression, and urged me to consider the boy and how I was being unjust by ignoring him. She literally exploited the child in her arms to make me feel guilty, as if I were the villain in this situation. However, I wasn't buying into it. I replied, "I don't know that child. I have nothing to do with him. He's not mine, and neither are you." That was the end of it. I could see her coming to terms with it at last. She was aware that I would never change my mind and that I would never allow her to return to my life. I could see the rage waning and being replaced by something else, either genuine regret or simply exasperation. However, I didn't care. She had attempted to walk all over me and expected me to smile and give her credit, but now she was simply a stranger. For a few more seconds, she stood there as if she was waiting for me to decide to call her back. I didn't say anything else, though. When it finally hit her that I meant every word, I just stood there and watched her expression. I closed the door without giving it another glance. I also didn't wait for her to it again this time. In my heart, I knew that I had already made up my mind and that there was no turning back. I don't know, but I felt like I had finally won as I moved away from the door. It was over, even though she had spent so much time hoping to return and use manipulation to get back into my life. I had freedom. Neither for her nor for us was there going to be another chance. She was now only a memory, one that I had at last relegated to the past. I felt like I could breathe again after all those years of suffering and shame. And what do you know? It was pleasant. I experienced an odd sense of tranquility as soon as I shut that door behind her. I no longer felt shamed, furious, or even astonished. It was as though all of the effort I had put into her over the years, all of the sorrow, the shame, and the never-ending wondering had simply disappeared. I was prepared to move on since I had at last found the closure I didn't realize I needed. This time, everything was truly finished, but naturally, it wasn't as tidy a conclusion as I had planned. Her mother texted me a few days later. She apologized, stating she was embarrassed by her daughter's handling of the situation and that she had attempted to reason with her, but clearly it had failed. Her mother was a kind person. She had been quite helpful to me when her daughter departed, and I could see that she was truly distressed by the situation. Although I had nothing against her, I didn't want to be dragged back into that situation. I simply said, "Thanks for checking in response," and didn't say anything further. I wasn't going to waste time justifying my choice, and I wasn't going to offer her mother any more information. She knew it was over because she understood. I learned tidbits over the course of the following few weeks via social media and mutual connections. She had apparently returned to living with her parents, and things weren't going well. The father of the child, the man she had left me for, was not involved at all. He had bailed out. She was left to figure things out on her own because, apparently, he hadn't committed to the long term. Few individuals were eager to help because she had essentially burned every bridge. Her former friends, who had supported me when she first vanished, didn't feel sorry for her. They weren't eager to get drawn back into her drama because they had all moved on. You can't hold them responsible. Her parents weren't too happy either. They didn't have enough money to sustain her and the child. I was aware of this since her father called me shortly after her mother texted me. Curiosity overcame me and I nearly didn't respond. He was direct but courteous. He mentioned that they were having financial difficulties and suggested that I might be able to assist them in some way. He continued talking about the infant and how difficult things were for them, saying, "We know you cared about her once." I listened courteously, but I couldn't help but giggle a little. Not aloud, but you get the idea, when he began to talk endlessly about how his daughter only needed a little help to get back on her feet. I politely informed him that his daughter made her own decisions and that I was neither in a position nor in the right frame of mind to assist. Since he didn't pursue it further, I believe he understood the message. Before I know it, her friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years, began contacting me. Some attempted to use the guilt angle, claiming that she was going through a difficult moment and that perhaps I could find it in my heart to give her another chance. She even had the audacity to say that the child needed a father figure and that I shouldn't allow my resentment stand in the way of my efforts to assist him. However, I refused to back down. I refused to allow anyone to make me feel guilty for making my own decision at last. I had given that woman all I had after years of feeling inadequate, and she had tossed it all away. Instead of relying on me to save her, she should at least take responsibility for her decisions. The calls and messages gradually decreased in volume before ceasing completely. Everyone seemed to finally realize that I was serious, that I had moved on, and that I would not get ensnared again. That's when the true calm arrived. For the first time in years, my life felt peaceful and typical. I had my friends, my museum, and my routines. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms, so it wasn't a fancy, glamorous one, but it was mine. The irony is that I once again began to discover joy in the small things, which I had not given much thought to when I was married. I would read novels I had been meaning to read for years, cook my own food, and take walks. It felt good to be free, and I understood that I could live my life as I pleased without anyone's approval. I wasn't always concerned about other people's happiness or approval for once. I felt as though I had gradually regained my life. Occasionally, I would stumble into someone who knew us both, and they would inquire, "Hey, what happened to her?" I would respond with a succinct, courteous response and shift the topic. I simply didn't want to keep going back to a chapter that was so obviously over. It wasn't that I was concealing anything. I had finally mastered the skill of leaving her in the past. When I last heard from her, things weren't going well. She was still jumping between her parents' house and friends' sofas after her welcome, and she was having trouble keeping a job. Occasionally, people I don't often communicate with would message me to let me know that she was seeking assistance from anyone who would listen. Some of them even implied that she hoped I would reconsider, that perhaps I would change my mind and end up playing dad to her child. However, that was not going to occur. I had already invested too much time and effort into rebuilding my life to consider taking that route. Her safety net was not going to be me. Just because things didn't go as she had hoped, I wasn't going to be the one to pick up the pieces. Nothing was going to pull me back into that chapter. I was finished. Ultimately, I believe I received the necessary closure. She was now coping with the repercussions of her decisions, and me. It was the first time since the day she departed that I felt completely, truly free. I had had enough of her looming over my life. I was happy that I had moved on. Not in a grand dramatic sense, but simply contented. And what do you know? That was sufficient. Thank you for watching. Life doesn't always unfold the way we expect it to, and sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. The story above serves as a powerful reminder of love, sacrifice, trust, and betrayal. It shows us that no matter how hard we try, some things can't be saved, especially when someone has already made the decision to walk away. Yet at the same time, it's also a story of rebirth, of rediscovering oneself after pain. This story isn't just a wake-up call, but a statement that sometimes true freedom and happiness come only when we're willing to leave the past behind and live for ourselves. After years of suffering and torment, the main character found peace in his life, no longer overshadowed by the past. This tale will undoubtedly make you reflect on love, forgiveness, and the power of choice. Do you have the courage to move beyond the wounds of your past and live a life full of meaning? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch more interesting, insightful, and inspiring stories. Thank you for watching this story, and we hope it encourages you to look at your own life with a fresh perspective and renewed hope. Share this video with friends and family so we can all explore the fascinating stories life has to offer.